Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I am delighted to be leading this session, and I will keep my introduction very brief. There is a lot to cover, as we were all just discussing in the speaker's room. The good news is we have a news peg for this session. A journalist loves a news peg. The WF's Global Cybersecurity Outlook report for 2025 was actually just published last week. So its contents will inform a lot of what we talk about. Now, the bad news or the challenging news or the reason that this conversation is so pressing is actually exactly what this report highlights, right? Which is the cyber landscape, as our panelists know very, very well, is becoming increasingly complex. So factors like AI and emerging technology, geopolitical instability, supply chain vulnerability, and talent shortages, all of those things are combining to play a role in making cybersecurity considerations much, much more complicated, much, much harder to disentangle, and exacerbating potentially inequity across the board, which is an important matter for us to discuss. So a quick reminder, if you're watching on the live stream, you can share thoughts on this panel using the hashtag WEF25. If you're here in the room, we will have plenty of time for questions, so please start thinking about what you would like to ask now. And we have a stellar lineup to unravel all of this complexity with us. So with that, please join me in welcoming Minister Gobind Singh, Minister of Digital for the Malaysia government, Minister Oscar López, Minister of Digital Transformation and Civil Service for Spain, Hoda Khzaimi, Associate Vice Provost for Research, Translation and Entrepreneurship at New York University, Abu Dhabi. We have Chaudhry, CEO, Chairman, and Founder of Zscaler, and Rob Lee, CEO and co-founder of Dragos. So guys, let's get right into it. Now, in reading this report from the World Economic Forum last week, one thing that really stood out to me was actually the geopolitical piece to this and the supply chain piece to this. I think, AI and emerging technology is very buzzy. We're certainly spending a lot of time, as we rightly should this week at Davos, talking about artificial intelligence. But these other factors that might feel a little bit less scintillating are actually incredibly important in the context of cybersecurity. Ministers, I'd love to start with you. Maybe Gobind will start with you and then move on. Just to hear a little bit about, the idea of geopolitical instability creating greater cybersecurity risk for organizations and government. Sort of how have you seen that evolve and play out? And then specifically, to your countries, when we're talking about Malaysia and we're talking about Spain, sort of tell us a little bit about the steps that you're taking to foster digital trust, right, to really bolster cyber resilience.
Thank you very much. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that technology is moving very quickly, and there's a push on part of most governments to ensure that all its people adapt and adopt to what's new. And subsequently, we see an increase in the number of people that are using devices. And this in itself underscores the importance of us looking at how it is we can ensure that the devices that they use are secure and that they are all aware of the risks involved, in particular the cybersecurity risks. So from a country perspective, I think we need to start thinking about how it is we can ensure that we as government are able to take this message out whilst we try and encourage people to use platforms to go digital. We also have to tell them that the platforms that they use are safe. We now have to build that trust in them. It ultimately comes back to stability and trust. If they trust, if there is trust, then you will see greater levels of adoption. And I think that is what we're trying to achieve as we go along, not just in our local jurisdictions, but also working with partners regionally and subsequently looking at things from a broader perspective globally. So in Malaysia, we have taken active steps to bring in legislation. So while we speak about policy, while we say that we acknowledge the fact that there's a need for us to boost cybersecurity measures, there's a lot of conversations that are ongoing. There's a lot of policy discussions as well. But in Malaysia, we've taken it a step further. What we've done is in March last year, we have tabled a cybersecurity bill in Parliament. It's now the Cybersecurity Act. And that is a bill, legislation that specifically requires the National Critical Information Infrastructure to ensure that they have cybersecurity measures and standards in place in their agencies, in the organizations. And if they don't, then there are repercussions to that. There are if there are standards that they are supposed to comply with and they haven't, then of course there are consequences that follow. In addition to that, we've also looked at how it is we can define what cybersecurity experts really are, because today the conversation on cybersecurity is very large, and there are many that claim to be cybersecurity experts, and I think fair enough, they probably are. But from a government perspective, I think there's a need for us to see how it is we can ensure that we set those basic standards, and those standards are met before we can, can accept or creditize them as being cybersecurity experts. So that's at the NCII level. Subsequently, we've also gone to look at how it is we can bolster laws that strengthen data protection. So in Malaysia, we have data protection laws. In July last year, we amended these laws to make the system more secure. Now, for example, we have provisions which require notice to be given when there are breaches, and then, of course, certain steps that need to be taken. And, of course, I think that underscores, again, the emphasis placed by the government on how it is we can ensure that whilst we want to build trust, we want to encourage people to use platforms, we can also say to them that, look, there are laws in place that makes certain that the data that you place on these platforms are safe. And, of course, if you also increase penalties, so we want to show that we are also firm in the event that there are data breaches, then action has to be taken. And I think that's something that needs to be done if we are to show that we are serious in how it is we deal with cybersecurity. In December last year, we did something, I think, a bit novel. We, for the first time, introduced data sharing legislation. And with data sharing, I'm sure all of you will appreciate this entire process by which there's a request for data, subsequently how it's managed, and subsequently if that request is allowed, then there's a process that has to be followed for the flow of that data sharing mechanism. In that process as well, there was a need for us to look at how it is we can ensure that there's security. So that legislation also looks at that. So it is important in this context to understand that the government of Malaysia has moved ahead very aggressively, showing that there are conversations, there are policy considerations, but we haven't stopped there. We've gone further. We've actually taken steps to legislate. And now, of course, it's a question of us executing and moving along and trying to build an ecosystem where we can actually build trust. And I think that's something that is important, because when we speak about cybersecurity, particularly in Malaysia, we look at it also from an ASEAN perspective. In Malaysia this year, we chair ASEAN, and we are trying to push ahead with building mechanisms by which we can actually secure cybersecurity regionally as well. So, to me, if we're going to speak about cybersecurity at a regional level, perhaps even at a global level, we need to first show that we ourselves at local jurisdiction have taken steps to put our house in order. And then from there, we can build on that conversation and ask others to come along. And I think it's a learning process, because we look at countries around us in ASEAN. They too have legislation in place, mechanisms that work. And we actually can learn from them. So ASEAN, recall, becomes a very important feature, particularly in this year. So in that context, I think looking at how it is things are developing, and as you said earlier in the question, in your opening, you look at how it is geopolitically, there are concerns globally. But I think subsequently, this is an area where all of us must think about how it is we can succeed together. Because cyber threats are threats that stretch across boundaries. We are going to ask our people and encourage our people to use platforms that don't just deal with transactions inter-jurisdiction. It's something that goes beyond jurisdiction and perhaps will even expand globally. So in this context, I think it's to our best interest that there's a conversation about how it is there are problems in different countries, what best practices are being applied in those countries, and for us to look and see how it is we can adopt and perhaps also use and scale the strategies adopted by other countries in strengthening our ecosystem. But all in all, I think, as I said earlier, it's important to underscore the fact that the government has taken aggressive steps. We want to build this ecosystem that emphasizes and builds trust in people. And ultimately, I think if we can do that, and we can show that this is a serious process that has to take place, and we're doing it quickly, then I think you're going to see people come along with us. And ultimately, when they see the strength in what this provides, particularly in this new world of technology, in this and technology that's emerging. I think those are the first steps that need to be taken, and subsequently we need to scale therefrom.
Yes, and really interesting, and sort of to distill, and maybe a theme that we'll come back to as we continue to talk. Really, it's sort of it's regulation, it's accountability in service of trust, starting at a local level before sort of broadening your horizons to think globally or even regionally. That's really, really interesting. Minister López, from your point of view, I would love to get that as well.
Well, actually, as you said before, I mean, it's a quite complex question. So
yes.
It is not easy to, and it's impossible to answer it from a national level. So this is an international and transnational level question. So as we saw in the report, I mean, if data is everything in the digital era, then cybersecurity is a top priority. So we don't have all the answers at the national level, but we can do many things. So this is not a question only about geopolitical, as you said. It is also a question about values, about economy, about companies, about civil society, and even about democracy. You know, democracies have old enemies with new tools. And the most important thing now is the speed. In this digital revolution is the speed. And cybersecurity is a race. It's a race between cybercrime, or between those who are using all the branches and those who have to regulate, who build the system to be safe, to build this digital trust. So it is a race, and it is really, really fast. What are we doing from Spain? Well, we work in a European framework, so we follow European rules. As you know, there's this European Act, NIS 2. We are just transposing that in Spain. So just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we launched our new act on cybersecurity. So it's a new act. And just to answer the complexity of the question, in this act, it's been 3 ministers working, because it's all the defense aspects. So it's the Minister for Defense. It's everything related to internal affairs, to the police, to cybercrime, and it is also my ministry, because we are talking about the new economy, we are talking about the society, about the rights of people, about the data, personal data of people. So we've tried to make a holistic point of view in this new act. What do we do? We answer the European question. We put one authority, just to call, just one telephone to call to Brussels, from Brussels to Madrid. But this authority is coordinating 3 authorities. It's coordinating the Center for this, from Defense, from the Ministry of Defense, the Center of the Police, I mean the Internal Affairs, and also our Institute for Cybersecurity. We have an institute in Spain for cybersecurity, so that is from the point of view of regulation. Then we are doing huge investments, even from the public sector, because, as I said before, it's a race. And you have to be fast, and you know more than me, all the experts.
I'm going to be asking about that race next.
So we are investing a lot. We are also investing in skills, and we are boosting the whole culture of cybersecurity between citizens. They have to learn, they have to know how to move in this new reality. So we are investing a lot in infrastructures and also in digital skills. That is through this Institute for Cybersecurity. Just let me tell you, in the last year, only in 2024, they received more than 80,000 calls, because you can call this Institute for Cybersecurity when you have an attack, even if you are a company or maybe a private one. You can call this institute, and they are going to attend you. So, law, rule of law, infrastructures. We have this agency, investments, skills, but that is at national level.
Right.
And we have, at least as European, we have the European framework. So it's really important what we do in a supranational level. And the key word is collaboration.
Right.
is collaboration between private sector, public sector, between countries, between agencies, between technologies. The key word is collaboration.
Certainly, and to talk about sort of, regulation, accountability, the rule of law, even collaboration, all rubbing up against the reality, which is, that emerging technology, AI being sort of the giant elephant taking up the entire room here, is changing the cybersecurity landscape so quickly. And I want to sort of really bring us to that. Now, the World Economic Forum report itself noted that 66% of organizations are concerned about AI's impact on cybersecurity this year. A much smaller percentage of those organizations, I would gather, actually feel completely prepared to grapple with what that new technology is bringing with it in terms of threat. So, Hoda, I would love to move to you. I know you have a lot to say and sort of a lot of insight into AI and emerging technology more broadly. I'd love to hear sort of what really stands out to you in terms of challenges to start, and sort of how do we even redefine, how do organizations and governments even start to sort of think about cyber resilience in this moment where technology is moving so quickly that it feels like you snap your fingers and all of a sudden the conversation you're having about regulation is 2 years outdated. Talk us through that a little bit, and then we'll move on to Jay and to Rob.
Amazing question. I think, Kate, getting into this is not easy because we are unlayering a complexity network, as Minister Singh and as well Minister López highlighted. It's not just in the essence of investment in the infrastructure or regulation, or as well in the skill set, but you are in a race of mindsets fragmentation. You do have a mindset of someone who's taken advantage of the system and who knows the economics of the system. And that is the attackers behind the space who have agility, who have access to information, who have as well access to opportunity in order to build the platforms and increase the threat level of attacks. While the agility structure and the lean structure of countering those attacks is not still perfectly, I would say, structured, because you still have to draft the regulation. We always say this in the field, right? You can launch a cybersecurity attack in seconds and then take down infrastructure that would worth maybe 100 billions. And we've seen this in the supply chain colonial pipeline attack, which caused a massive disruption for the oil and gas industry in the US, and then caused a massive subsequent spillover effect all over other as well sectors. It took seconds to have this level of attacks, but it takes maybe years to draft this kind of alignment in between different, I would say, private sector and public sector organization in order to get into an act. So we need to really have maybe a different regulation structure that is a bit fast and agile in order to counter this, a different as well urgency structures. If you look at you talked about vulnerabilities in supply chain, right? It's not just the vulnerabilities that exist on supply chain, it's the intertwined effect, the geopolitical tension that would lead to maybe the acceleration of developing technologies. We're talking about developing hardware and software that is going to build a higher level of reliance for AI, for example, or maybe quantum into different kind of zones. But because of these kind of CHIP Act that was drafted, we don't have that kind of acceleration in developing hardware across different regions. It's only specific regions right now who have maybe access to the sovereign infrastructure to develop hardware will be able to join in this race. So we are in the pull and tug of different economic incentives on the ground. You're asking me about AI and the maturity of AI in the current field. At the moment, AI is heavily being incentivized by the growth, the economic commercial growth of specific organizations who are developing the algorithmic tools, and they are providing them to the public. Are they providing a perfect solution that are safe and secure and that also leads to a perfect status of trust, as the Minister Singh just highlighted? I don't think so, because you are placing a technology in the hands of the public that is 30% reliable. We are normalizing the fact of unreliability by saying hallucinations are amazing and poetic and artistic. And at the same time, you're saying you're drafting a different kind of criteria of reliability, I would say, and security. You're saying, okay, there is bias in the software, but maybe it's okay to have bias. And we're trying also behind the scene to encourage the academic community who is providing for those algorithms to be responsible and to make sure that these algorithms, when you develop them, the DNA of the development would remove the bias. And there is like a movement that is happening out there. But this movement is not driven by the commercial arm that is fastly accelerating the progress. This movement is driven by the research, which is slowly being developed for this kind of industry. So there is this level of tension in between acceleration of what is good for the purpose of the collectives and what is as well not idealistic for the purpose as well of the collectives. If we're talking about regulations, for example, we have different level of regulations. The one that were developed by the European Union, for example, the risk-oriented, amazing development of those regulation structures, but still the attribution structures are not very clear. So I still can get away with having, attacks driven by AI platforms in different regions because the attribution mechanism is not being placed into the system. And the fact that sometimes you care about risk while you don't value risk versus the principles, versus the values of the societies that exist, versus protecting the rights of privacy, for example, the rights not to be analyzed, the rights to be forgotten. We can draft them in the regulation, but it doesn't mean anything if the technology is not catching up. You don't have an algorithm today that have the capability of erasing your footprint of the internet.
Right.
So we live in a poetic, fragmented effort world because driven by different incentives. The private sector incentives are great, but they're developing for fast access to market, first entry advantage into this industry that would give them access to future economic, I would say, advantages, not necessarily by building perfect, responsible technology at the hands of the public. And the government is interested in building their sovereign, I would say, at the moment, status of cybersecurity posture, which is totally understandable given the fact that you don't have control. You don't have control over what is the mindset of attacker. We tend to respond with a sense of urgency when there is a war, but we are not responding with the same level of urgency when there is an attack against an infrastructure that can trickle down to multiple countries. We've seen the NATO attack, for example, on SolarWind, which led to 18,000, I think, participants disruption. And that disruption, I think the mapping of the losses that happened is around 10 billion euros. I mean, it's just in a fractional second that you can have this risk. And I think if you live in a world where the attack advantage is being reported to be from 3 to 10 billion to 10 trillion USD, that's a GDP of a country, right? That's a GDP of Germany or other countries. We should take digital space threats as critically important as physical space risk.
Yes, that certainly makes sense. And now, Jay and Rob, let me turn it to you, sort of similar question, just piggybacking off this idea of emerging technology and how it's really changing the landscape. I mean, are traditional approaches to handling all of this complexity, to addressing cyber threats, still effective? I mean, what has changed? What has caught up? What still needs to change for us really to be able to get ahead of where emerging technologies are taking cybersecurity? Jay, let's start with you.
Yes. I was asked to present to the board of directors of a large bank. And one of the questions the board member asked me was the following. She said, Jay, you're sitting in Silicon Valley running one of the largest cloud security companies. And you work with Fortune 500 companies who have lots big budgets, access to technology, and expertise. And still I see that lots of them are getting breached.
Right.
If that's happening to them, what hope do I have?
It's a very sad question.
It took me 20 seconds to think through, because I hadn't expected the question. But reality is that larger companies are stuck with inertia. If you look at security, the way security and networking is done today, is the same 30-year-old technology. Firewalls, VPNs, you build a moat around the castle is your data center. Inside, everything is trusted. Outside, everything is untrusted. That model worked for several years. When data center was the center of the universe, and everyone sat inside the office, castle, outside good. Now, applications that left the castle, you got Salesforce, you got Office 365, you got all these clouds out there. Your people no longer work in the office, IoT, or every device is everywhere. The model had to change. That's where zero trust architecture has evolved. We at Zscaler focus on building zero trust, which is disrupting the old technology of firewalls and VPNs, which is saying you can no longer build these moats. Zero trust starts by saying don't trust anyone. In this architecture, rather than a moat around the castle, you build a switchboard, which says, if you want to connect to something, you're going to come through me. I'm going to check A, B, C, and D. If all the checks pass, you'll be connected to application A or B or C. That's what has to happen. And it's happening, actually. US government in the past 4 years actually made a big push on zero trust architecture or adoption. I think so changes need to happen. Hackers have no inertia. The bigger the organization, the slower they move. And that's really what's causing all the issues. But from cyber point of view, if you think about it, the applications and systems you build, one, you need to be building them with better security. So you can't break into them too quickly. So when you build those applications, security needs to be embedded in them to start with. Now, knowing that no systems will be perfectly secure, then the second thing you do is, when you want to allow access, you make sure the access happens through zero trust architecture, where you're not on the corporate network. Otherwise, the most common hack is, just like Colonial Pipeline, they stole credentials of a VPN system. The VPN kind of says, come in, connect with me. Once you get in, you're inside the castle, you move inside, you find high-value assets, in that case, the billing application. You encrypt the data, the application can no longer run, and access to gas for millions of people is gone.
Yeah.
Most of the attacks are not sophisticated. Some are. But technology needs to move, and I think it's not the government's role most of the time. In fact, sometimes over-regulation can stop things. Each entity needs to do its own job. Government needs to do its own job to protect its own organizations. And some level of regulation is good. Over-regulation is always bad.
Sure, sure. I like this idea, sort of, as you were talking, I was thinking in my head, sort of starting from a premise and really a strategic approach of zero trust really is what's necessary to build the sort of trust that you were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. I think that's interesting.
And you build zero trust is not always zero trust. I mean, start with no trust.
Start with no trust.
And then you give them this much trust to access application A and A only.
Right.
You're not on the network, you're not insider. Like if you come in the building, you just can't move around. You'll be taken to a meeting room, your meeting happens, you get escorted out.
Right.
That's the model.
That's the model, similar to the security environment I've been navigating this week, actually. Rob, same question to you. Sort of talk to us in the context of emerging technology, how quickly things are moving. I mean, it's really overwhelming, and where that sort of rubs up against cybersecurity from your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, as we look at like that complexity discussion, right? I think most people would be shocked just how much transformation is happening in our infrastructure, especially in my world, which is mostly on what I would consider operational technology, so the industrial side of these companies, power grids, manufacturing facilities, water facilities, et cetera. They used to have a lot of legacy infrastructure, but they made a lot of investments years ago. This isn't like just emerging. To start having automatic switching, to start having electric systems that can sort of, quote unquote, heal from different types of effects that happen, whether it be hurricanes or whatever. And all of that digitization is now providing an opportunity for attackers to be able to take advantage of it and misoperate it. A lot of times we hear about cyber attacks, it's not, in the infrastructure world, it's not always the 0-day or the vulnerability or whatever. Sometimes it's just misoperation. If An operator can open up an electric panel, so can an adversary. If an operator can pour chemicals into the water for good purposes, an adversary can do it for too much, and then have a sort of an ominous approach to it. So as we look at that digitization, as we look at that complexity, that presents a couple of major issues that I see. One, again, the ability to attack it is there, but two, it can just end up being non-resilient in of itself. Sometimes we just don't understand how all these complex systems work. Some of these private companies are so excited to take that automation journey and all that it can do for the profit share that they really don't understand some of the systems they're putting in place. And once upon a time, there may have been somebody at that oil facility. She worked there for 20 years, her daddy worked there for 20 years, her granddaddy worked there for 20 years. They know that environment. But now you come in and digitize everything, lots of automation. Now it's not one person that knows it. It's 5 consulting companies, 3 different original equipment manufacturers, a bunch of contractors. And what that means is when something goes wrong, you don't really go to anyone anymore to try to figure it out. The scary thing, I think, even from a government perspective, is you can have infrastructure disruption and we cannot get root cause analysis if we didn't invest ahead of time. So you could be in a situation where you have an explosion at a refinery and have no idea if it was a maintenance issue, if it was a cyber attack by a foreign state, or it was a mistake by a contractor. And that is a really scary place to be in.
That is terrifying.
You just don't know what actually happened.
Yeah.
All of your response is out. And again, a lot of companies don't realize that in the world of operation technology, you have to invest ahead of that. The data is transient. It's gone if you didn't collect it ahead of time. Right. So you think about, again, a world that's getting so much more automated, so much more complex, at a time that you introduced the geopolitical discussion, that states and criminals, for whatever reason, think it's a valid target to target civilian infrastructure. We've seen a bunch of different water attacks this past year, cyber attacks on electric power systems, et cetera. They see it as a valid target to go after our civilians. I've got 3 kids. That's awful. That's go rob from the bank. No offense. Like I'll live with that, but don't take down the water services, the electric services, et cetera. That's just evil.
Yeah.
And so we have this growing automated world, massively complex, executives and boards that may be disconnected from what's actually happening in the building, and a lot of investment for that with a trailing cybersecurity budget. Cybersecurity teams are getting pulled in many different directions. So I always hear about do the next thing and what's coming with AI and how can we do the next thing? And I'm like, man, you have no idea how little is being done currently. The basics do work. It's just a lot of companies aren't doing the basics. You'd be stunned at how many infrastructure companies around the world have no idea what's going inside their plant. They have no visibility into anything happening in there. And then we're having serious discussions about how we're going to prevent AI attacks. I'm like, could you just go do the basics?
Yeah.
Let's start there, and you'd be okay. And the last thing on is we talk about the regulation side of the house. I see a lot of governments trying to create regulation. I think Jay hit it very well. We need a lot more approach to harmonization of regulation, especially for multinationals. I was actually very impressed with the Malaysian delegation. Went over to the Singapore CSA's conference, and the Malaysian delegation came trying to think about the regulation they were crafting. And the question was, before we try to think we know right, what is Singapore doing already? And what is the US government doing already with NERC and the electric systems? And I set them down and sort of mapped it out. I was like, here's what worked, here's what didn't. And there was no ego. It was just, hey, we want to get this right, let's go look at what others did. And I would encourage a lot more countries to take that approach.
Great.
Now, I want to make sure that we have time for questions, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask you all about equity in the context of cybersecurity. Jay, you talked a little bit about sort of the bigger the organization, right, the slower it is to move. And I think, Rob, your comments just now about sort of, different geopolitical players coming to the table with no ego, that's an interesting comment with regards to equity as well. Hoda and ministers following, I'd love to hear sort of what stands out to you when we think about smaller and larger organizations, when we think about developed and emerging economies, making sure that there is sort of this equitable access to knowledge about cybersecurity, to implementation, to sort of effective strategies. How do we make sure that the playing field, especially in the context of emerging technology, is as even as possible, right? At least that we are making progress towards a more equitable future. Just very briefly, a few remarks from each of you so that we can open it up to questions. Hoda.
I think the mass opportunity that exists in the equity space is understanding that it's a multi-layer approach. It's government as well having equitable access to resources as well as organization and individuals, which means allowing governance government their sovereign spaces to create their own cybersecurity assets, because there are indigenous as well structures within their own infrastructure that they want to preserve for the longer run, as well as organization allowing them a space to grow and allowing a free flow of capital and investment for those organizations. What we're seeing at the moment is structures of monopolistic approaches across industries, even in the emerging technology space or the cybersecurity space, that doesn't allow SMEs to come in to tackle these niche ideas and to grow in a healthy, prosperous manner, so they can provide for different spaces within cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is a complex space. It's not just a technological question, it's a geopolitical question, and it's a individual questions on privacy. So on the equitable access to knowledge when it comes to individuals, they need not just the basic information of how to attack a system and protect a system, they need as well accessible platforms for research and development, for science, because right now the knowledge, what is, as the minister have said, what is exactly cybersecurity professional? What does it mean? Because it's a multi-layer 360 view of the world. You need to be understanding, you need to have a holistic understanding of the geopolitics of the world, of the legislation structures, of the regulation structure, and you need to know your ABCs on cryptography, on AI, and on the multiple asset structure that exist on the science aspects. So I think allowing them this space, an open box and tool to experiment, to develop those intrinsic, I would say, primitive is very important, and not to just perceive them as deployment entities. Like we're building, I think, for segregated world, and we should be very careful from doing this level of developing AI or emerging technologies in specific economies and perceiving the rest of the world as just deployment structures of those economies.
Absolutely, I love that. Ministers, anything briefly to add before we open it up for a few questions?
Well, I think the opportunity is proportional to the threats. I mean, when you talk about inequality, you can talk inside the country or between countries. Yeah. So the thing is, we are talking about security. Who's got the whole sovereignty? Nobody. Even the US, the most powerful, doesn't have the whole sovereignty on AI, on new technologies. Maybe 3 players in the world can do something: US, China, European Union. Don't know about India, but the rest of countries. As I said before, even the US hasn't got the whole sovereignty, so it's really, really difficult to who's feeding the AI, what's learning the AI.
Right.
Just imagine Palo Alto wasn't in California, but in Afghanistan, ruled by Taliban. What will the AI be answering now? No? Just let me give you just one example, because there's not going to be time.
Yes, very briefly.
It is not about this, but as I was saying before, now in Spain we are testing in this Institute for Cybersecurity. We are testing toys. We are testing hundreds and hundreds of toys, because toys they use chips and they are connected. So we bring our homes for the kids, all the toys, and they connect to the Wi-Fi of the home. Mm-hmm. Half of them have security breaches. They can get you with a virus and get into your personal, your home Wi-Fi, and then get into your bank accounts. Half of them. So the challenge is huge. There are so many aspects, so many economical and companies and countries and rules, and it is really, really difficult to solve it from the point of view of a government, only from the national level. So that's why.
So if I may add a couple of comments. Security can be complex, but it doesn't need to be. Okay, if you're trying to be 100% cyber-proof, you'll never be.
Yeah.
I think we should think about, let's build a 4-foot fence around our house first and move on, rather than keep on talking about a 20-foot fence we need. There are lots of arguments here. There's a basic security that need to be put in place. That's not very expensive. In fact, if you talk about equity, the bigger issue ends up being knowledge. Okay.
Sure, yeah.
The simple technology for security is not expensive. You know, the old technology is far more expensive. When we go in with zero trust architecture, if they're spending, for example, $1 million on security products, we remove most of them and probably replace them with far better security at half the cost. So technologies can be simple. What's lacking in some of these emerging world is lack of knowledge and understanding. That's a bigger thing.
Yes.
And I think the other piece ends up being, when we start combining government, regulation, geopolitical this, it looks complex. But let's start focus on, if I'm a corporation with 1,000 people, my focus is to protect my employees first. That can be done. And the consumer world gets its own complicated stuff. But to compartmentalize the problem, solve those problems, rather than debate it forever.
It's like start in your own backyard, build the
Yes.
4-foot fence,
Exactly.
then look over the fence, see what else is out there.
Again,
I want to.
just chime in here, just to put things in perspective. I think at the end of the day, when you look at cybersecurity, we're looking at a whole spectrum of different instances.
Right.
You're going to encourage people to use devices. You're going to start with the man on the street who's working on his handphone right out of an eatery. Then you're going to look at small businesses. You're going to look at larger businesses, industries. You're going to look at government. So it spreads across a spectrum. And I think what's important for us to understand is that these different groups have different challenges.
Exactly.
They have different needs. So I think we have to come back to basics. I completely agree. Awareness is key. Knowledge is key. But the way in which we deal with things, I think, has to be looked at from the perspective of the sector itself. What do they need? How do you empower? How do you make sure that everyone invests in cybersecurity? And this is where, if I may just take it to where the discussion was earlier, when we speak about regulation, for example, in Malaysia, what we're trying to do is we're trying to empower government to make regulations in areas that are necessary so that we can ensure that cybersecurity is a key focus of those areas. Now, in addition to that, we also set up different groups of people. For example, we have the National AI Office. We also have a Cybersecurity Academy. And we also have what we proposed to launch in June this year, the Data Safety and Trust Commission. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to get all these different sectors to come forward, tell us exactly what they think we should be doing. I think that interaction and collaboration is very, very important. So we understand their needs. So we have organizations that takes into consideration what they need, what is required to be done to ensure that we are secure. At the same time, the government also has the mechanism by which we can make it happen. And you know, when we speak about, I like this example about how it is, you know, when there's a war, there's the sense of urgency. I mean, not very long ago, all of us looked at this screen in one afternoon, and it was just blue screens in front of us. None of us knew exactly what was going on. We didn't know whether it was a cybersecurity attack, whether it was just a technical glitch. Point is, at that point in time, things came to a standstill. We didn't know where to look to for answers. We didn't know what was going to happen next. But the next day, we were told that it was a glitch. It was all was okay. Everybody expressed how important it was for us to ensure that we had systems that were secure. But today, it can happen right now again. The question is, are we ready? So I think from a government perspective, we have the responsibility to take the lead. We have the responsibility to create structures within government that allows us to act quickly in the event something happens, or also to look at policies to formulate ways in which these different sectors can actually succeed. So I agree, but I think it's just a question of approach. From a government perspective, of course, it's huge. There's a lot of challenges, many things to be done.
I so appreciate all of this, and we could be here all day.
Sure.
I want to try to squeeze in one question, if anyone has one, before we wrap. This has been so interesting. There's been a lot covered. Any takers?
In the absence of one, could I just say that, again, on the report, like I do think people should go actually take a good look at the report. Julie and team did a phenomenal job.
I have a copy
with
of it in the speaker's room if anyone wants my copy. I mean, it's really
It lays
good.
out, as we're talking about the basics, one of the things that I talk about that I think we kind of missed a bit, or at least I'd missed in my part to push in, is the resilience discussion of like the requirements. Again, like what do you actually need the system to do or the environment to do? I see a lot of cybersecurity people come at this with, here's what I want to do cybersecurity. And it's like, stop. What are we actually trying to accomplish as a business? How do we reduce the V, as they talked about in the report, to actually make it where if I'm a pipeline, I'm back up and running regardless of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities? And you'll find that that basic question of what are we actually in the business of is not happening in most of the CISO discussions I'm in. And so you get people misinvesting. You get people spending 95% of their budget on the website and nothing on their operation environment. So just what's the requirements, figure out the requirements. I think the report digs into that well, and I think it can encapsulate a lot of this.
Thank you. Oh,
One comment I'd like to make is,
Okay.
I think public and private sector cooperation is good.
yes.
That's what to do, but public sector, a government shouldn't interfere too much Government shouldn't be telling private companies, do this, because a lot of those companies are motivated, because otherwise they won't be successful, and learn from it.
We are going to wrap. Let me just sort of sum up, if I could take one thing away from this. All of this complexity, all of this emerging technology, sort of all of this, almost this feeling of sort of hand-waving panic in the context of cybersecurity, I think what we heard from everyone in their own way today was really rewind, go back to basics, build your 4-foot fence, make sure you are ready ahead of the game instead of trying to play catch up after something goes wrong. And I think that is sort of a great sort of building block to build the kind of trust that at the very beginning you were referring to is so important. So thank you all so much for being here. Hope this was interesting and I hope it was helpful. And thank you again. I think we'll wrap it there.
Thank you.